To escape the torment, he secluded himself for 5 long years, drowning in despair. With no glimmer of hope ahead, he trudged through a monotonous existence until death came knocking. In the afterlife, Hart was lucky enough to encounter a goddess who offered him a second chance through reincarnation. In the new world awaiting him, magic reigned supreme, and the goddess, feeling pity, bent the rules to ease Hart's journey. Hart's new life began as a baby, greeted by the cheers of the king. The king expressed gratitude to Geislot for birthing a handsome prince who bore a striking resemblance to both parents, marked by a royal emblem on his chest. Hart pondered if the attractive man and woman beside him were indeed his parents. He started envisioning the delightful moments of his upcoming life. The king instructed his attendant to fetch a sphere to assess the child's magical potential, revealing Hart's magic index was a mere 2, with only barrier magic to show. The couple was taken aback. The king warned that if word got out about their child's lack of abilities, trouble would surely follow. Geislot, equally alarmed, insisted that this secret must remain within the room. Hart, lying in his crib, felt a chilling sense of foreboding. In a shocking turn, both parents declared that Prince Hart, born that day, had perished. Hart was then taken to the woods and left behind, abandoned by the goddess. Receiving such chaotic news left her at a loss for what to do. The child she had intervened for was thrust into a wretched existence right from the start. Perhaps the world's magic measuring device could only register 2 digits. Yet the number she had intended was 4 digits, 1002. In the forest, Hart found himself in a dire situation. In his infant form, he felt powerless, contemplating the use of magic as others had described. Hart first conjured a floating cube-shaped barrier. He could enlarge it, change its color, limitless possibilities at his fingertips. His actions caught the attention of a fox, hungry and eager to make him its meal. Hart used his magic to evade the fox's bite, even manipulating branches and stones to crush the creature. Oddly, Hart understood the fox as it pleaded for mercy and surrendered. The fox sat beside him, admitting she had planned to eat him to boost her magical power, but she hadn't anticipated his strength. Hart created a sound barrier to chat with her. When she inquired about his identity, he casually mentioned he was merely a child abandoned for lacking power. The girl noticed streams of magic flowing elegantly from Hart and gasped in disbelief. After a moment of thought, she exclaimed if he was the reincarnation of a demon lord. Then she rolled on the ground, declaring her surrender and begging him to end her life. Hart, uninterested, replied that as long as she refrained from attacking others, he had no issue. Flay beamed and commended Hart for his kindness, truly fitting for a demon lord. In his infant body, Hart lacked the energy to argue, and after exerting himself with Flay, he felt faint from hunger. At that moment, a man appeared with a bag of milk, but Flay blocked his path, protecting her master. Gold explained that the child was a distant relative, and though he didn't know why the baby was abandoned, he had come to rescue him. Hart whispered for Flay to accept the milk quickly, as he was on the verge of starvation. She remained doubtful, questioning why Gold would go to such lengths for someone else's child in the depths of the forest at night. Gold replied with pain that his wife had once given birth to a child. Sadly, the baby had been unable to cry upon birth. Hart was abandoned for his lack of power, but for a baron like Gold, that was inconsequential. Regardless of the child's situation, he wished for the boy to experience joy in life. Seeing Flay weep at his tail, Gold had never encountered such a peculiar magical creature, one that not only cried, but accepted a human boy as her master. He proposed that if she had accepted the boy as her master, he would also welcome her as a servant. Touched by Gold's kindness, Flay resolved to follow and care for Hart. The pact between them was formed. Gold carefully smashed Hart's cradle, tore his garments, and finally sprinkled fresh blood over them. 9 years passed with Hart being nurtured by Baron Gold's family in the frontier. He had intended to leave after weaning, but found himself staying unconsciously due to the warmth of his adoptive parents. Hart had a younger sister named Char, who always hesitated to approach him. Char had a penchant for following Flay, eager for some playtime together. Flay's response was icy. Her priority was caring for Hart. Out of nowhere, Hart interjected, requesting Flay to look after his sister. From above, he observed them playing joyfully. His lonely silhouette appeared somewhat melancholic, prompting Natalia to approach and reassure Hart. As a mother, she suspected Char simply lacked the skills to engage with someone her age. Hart crumbled at this revelation, panicking and fearing the little girl had uncovered his true age. Natalia consoled Hart, encouraging him not to lose hope and suggesting he find a gift for Char. Moreover, it wasn't wise for him, as the future heir, to isolate himself in his room. Hart retreated to his room, still mulling over his plan to leave the family. For 9 years, he had immersed himself in barrier magic in preparation for his departure. He successfully crafted a barrier robot that looked just like him. Though it couldn't yet speak or move, Gold came to Hart's room, urging him to train and questioning his seclusion. Hart paused, then explained that he was obviously isolating himself to delve into ancient magic. Gold was satisfied with his son's response and tossed him a sword to assess his skills. To his surprise, Hart shattered the sword in Gold's grip, who then declared he would strike again. As the sword neared him, Hart instinctively leaped to evade it. Gold stood in shock, staring at his son. The agility required to dodge that attack suggested a level beyond 30. Still, he sensed something was off about this situation. Gold whispered to his wife that it might be an awakening of latent abilities. He speculated that Hart could potentially be a reincarnated magical entity. Natalia disagreed, pointing out that Hart lacked a tail or elongated ears. Gold recalled the royal emblem emblazoned on his chest. Yet, with a magical beast like Flay at his side, he couldn't be an ordinary child. Natalia dismissed her husband's theories. She insisted Hart was just a typical child, nothing extraordinary. Little Char, resting on her mother's lap, slowly opened her eyes, resolutely believing her brother wasn't magical. After a brief training session with his father, Hart noticed his father's frequent absences. Curious about his father's activities, he activated a surveillance barrier and spotted many injured soldiers near Gold. He followed the address to inquire about what had transpired. Gold sadly informed his son that bandits were ravaging their territory, but their whereabouts remained elusive. This posed a significant danger for a child like Hart. After a clear explanation, Gold urged him to return home swiftly. Hart complied and made his way back, but as he passed the injured soldiers, he quietly cast healing magic on them. That night, he and Flay devised a plan to assist his father in resolving this crisis. The first step involved tracking down the bandits who had attacked the soldiers using the surveillance system. Their discoveries were surprising. One of the bandits was a soldier under Gold's command. Flay speculated that the enemy had an informant with access to the Baron's information. A threat that required immediate action, Hart and Flay took flight under the moonlight, a scene that Char inadvertently witnessed. At the bandit hideout celebrating their recent victory, they were in high spirits. The leader commanded them to wrap up their mission quickly so they could return to the Empire. Hart and Flay appeared out of nowhere. He used magic to bind them and gently asked who they were, noting their reluctance to cooperate. Hart seized the first bandit and hurled him against the wall, warning that their sole task was to answer his questions. With the answers he received, Hart began to piece together the entire scenario. Only someone of higher rank than his father could orchestrate this. It became clear that someone within the kingdom was targeting Gold's life. Before departing, Hart commanded Flay to incinerate the entire fortress. Those who threatened his father deserved no mercy. On their return, Hart informed Flay that regardless of whether they were from the Empire or not, he would show no mercy to anyone who harmed his loved ones. For the time being, he planned to send an unsigned letter to his father, detailing the day's events. The following morning, Gold received word inside, mentioning he had sensed something off about the bandits, but hadn't thought the Empire could be involved. Char, perched on her father's lap, inquired about who had eliminated the villains. Gold responded that he too was curious. If it was someone powerful and familiar with the area, it could only be Flay. She frequently traversed the land, subduing magical creatures, so perhaps she had dealt with this situation as well. Char seemed to have an epiphany and quickly hopped down, requesting permission to leave. Having thought of another possibility, she felt unable to share it with her father. The little girl approached Flay, asking if her brother possessed two identities. She recounted witnessing her brother and Flay flying away from their home, so she checked his room, finding him still asleep, devoid of the menacing aura she usually sensed. Flay didn't respond to her, instead steering the conversation by complimenting her ability to perceive Hart's magical energy. She explained to the little girl that he was born with immense power, which was truly remarkable. Char posed another question, asking if Flay was aware of her brother's true identity. Flay continued to withhold information, fabricating a story that it was a secret beyond a child's understanding. Hart, overhearing her recounting everything, realized he needed to be more cautious in his actions. He took no chances, setting up numerous alert systems in case Char approached. For several days, the little girl shadowed Hart, whether he was bathing, reading, or training with his father. Hart wanted to pause and inquire about her behavior, but every time he approached, she darted away. It wasn't until the 7th day, when the girl and her mother prepared for an outing, that she ceased following Hart, worried for their safety. Hart wished to send Flay along with them. Natalia replied she hadn't seen her lately, asking if Hart had requested something from her. Only then did he recall asking Flay to scare off magical beasts threatening the town. After his mother and sister left, Hart returned to his room, monitoring them through the surveillance system focused on Char. As soon as he activated it, Hart's mouth went dry as he shouted, "No way!" The barrier revealed another group of bandits aiming to harm my mother and sister. Natalia held her daughter tightly as they fled, puzzled by the presence of Imperial soldiers. Hart placed a new barrier around Char, and the girl directed her mother toward the designated escape route. Natalia sensed someone was secretly guiding her daughter's path, though she couldn't fathom how. But now wasn't the time for contemplation. The two raced toward a deep ravine, and Char pointed down, urging her mother to jump. Midway down, Natalia's protective magic waned, causing both mother and daughter to plummet. Upon landing, she realized her magic was nearly depleted, leaving her unable to run any further. Char pointed to a rock ahead, exclaiming, "Mom, just a bit further." She led her mother into a cave illuminated by strange luminescent moss. She surveyed the area, thinking such a bright place couldn't possibly offer concealment. Natalia took Char to a hidden nook, lying that she would step outside to find the person guiding her daughter, unaware of their identity, but convinced they were a force for good. Char pleaded with her mother not to leave, crying out in distress. Despite her heartache, Natalia dashed outside the cave, believing this was the only way to safeguard her daughter. As she bolted out, the cave behind her vanished, reverting to a mere rock. Natalia murmured, "Illusion magic, who could wield such power?" At that moment, the Imperial group arrived, swords drawn. The leader, spotting only Natalia, commanded those behind him to search for the child who must be close by. Natalia understood she couldn't afford to be captured and drew her sword, ready to defend herself. The leader scrutinized her closely, wary of her potential resistance. But before he could issue a threat, her sword was aimed at her own throat. Hart didn't arrive in time, wrapping Natalia in his arms, glaring furiously at the group. Inside the cave, Char anxiously called for her mother repeatedly, terrified of being discovered by the group and too afraid to raise her voice. Hart brought Natalia in from outside, reassuring the little girl that her mother was okay, instructing her to stay by her side since Natalia had fainted. Just hold on a little longer. Help would arrive soon. Char, hiding behind a rock, sensed the familiar menacing aura, but her brother had saved her and their mother. Summoning all her courage, the little girl stood up and called out to her brother. Recalling her mother's words, she asked if her brother was indeed a champion of justice. Hart, unsure how to respond, was momentarily taken aback by his little sister's inquiry. Ultimately, he decided to play along with his sister for the time being. Hart chuckled heartily, declaring, "That's right, I'm a champion of justice." The young girl inquired if her brother's abilities were used to vanquish villains. She recalled her mother's teachings about how justice allies punish wrongdoing. Char stood beside Hart, gazing up at him, exclaiming, "Oh my, I've completely misjudged my brother." Hart grinned, reassuring his sister that his secret identity prevented him from sharing details. He hurried back to Gold, who asked his son what he thought of the person aiding his sister and mother. Without hesitation, he stated that if that person wasn't causing harm, they weren't an enemy. Gold nodded, saying, "Right, my daughter mentioned they were a justice ally too." Hart casually posed a question, asking his father why, despite heightened border security, they still got through. Gold quickly concluded that someone must have breached the territory before he tightened security. Hart responded that was nearly correct, but there was something more precise: alliances. Gold scrutinized his son, surprised that a 9-year-old could articulate such thoughts. His anger resurfaced, silently cursing that old fox for being so impatient. Char and her mother returned, interrupting the discussion between the two. After embracing her father, the little girl dashed straight to her brother. Both parents were taken aback by the girl's actions, wondering when the siblings had grown so close. Char candidly stated that when the moment called for it, she could be a very good child. Hart silently wished his sister would drop that suggestive tone. Since discovering Hart's true identity, Char had visited her brother's room daily to play. The days of being disliked were over, but now with her constant presence, he felt lost. Hart affectionately patted his sister's head, feeling no irritation. In fact, it felt more like having a loyal pet by his side. The little girl spotted the glowing screen on the desk and curiously asked her brother about it. Hart explained it was a surveillance barrier, and when she wondered if it was ancient magic, he simply agreed. Hart had once mentioned to his father that he was studying ancient magic, prompting his sister to praise him. He explained that these were magical techniques lost to time, making the research quite challenging. Encouraged by her brother, Char revealed she had seen books on ancient magic in the castle library. As promised, Char led Hart to the location of the ancient magic books. While browsing the books, he noticed that barrier magic shared many traits with ancient magic. The little girl sat beside her brother, observing the book he held, stating that ancient magic had various interpretations. But this one was particularly fascinating. Hart was taken aback and asked if she had read it. Char eagerly replied that her mother and Flay had taught her, and she wanted her brother to read it too. Seeing the eager look on his sister's face, Hart felt he had no choice but to comply, activating his big brother skills. While chatting with his sister, Hart inadvertently mentioned an anime character from his past life. The little girl gazed at him with wide, sparkling eyes, eager to see it. Hart indulged her wish, and 2 weeks later, he had essentially created a system to access the modern Japanese internet. The accounts he had previously set up were still functioning perfectly. For now, Hart selected children's content for his sister to enjoy. Char was mesmerized by the moving images and sounds. But then another issue arose. She complained that she couldn't understand the dialogue and asked her brother to teach her Japanese. At first, Hart worried that his 5-year-old sister might struggle with learning a new language. After just 2 hours, he dismissed that concern. She had already mastered her hiragana and katakana. Watching Char type an elementary school language into the search bar, Hart was astonished, questioning what was up with the kids in this world. 2 weeks later, Char burst in from outside, urgently requesting her brother to play the next episode of Tamsum. Once the TV was on, she obediently settled into the chair. As she watched the screen, Hart reflected on how it had been 2 weeks since Char began watching anime, and she had picked up Japanese almost fluently from the shows. He pondered if his sister might actually be a genius. If that were the case, he couldn't allow her to watch anime all day. Hart found himself in an internal conflict. Seeing her joy, he couldn't bring himself to say no. As a brother, he couldn't let his sister down. When Char asked to watch a new episode, he declined for the first time, enforcing a rule of only 3 hours a day. Char felt disheartened, her thoughts clouded throughout dinner. Natalia, sitting next to her, inquired if her daughter was feeling tired. Gold questioned his son about his sister's recent shadowing and their plans. Char snapped out of her daze and quickly stated they were studying ancient magic. Natalia cheerfully asked if Hart was teaching her sister, adding that he should ensure she doesn't become too obsessed. After dinner, Char continued to trail her brother. Hart paused, reminding her that no amount of pleading would change his mind about letting her watch more. He instructed her to get ready for a bath and then head to bed. Natalia, who had been quietly following, was surprised by the closeness of the siblings. She smiled, believing her dream was on the verge of realization. As a baron, Gold had a responsibility to eliminate the bandits and prevent them from wreaking havoc in his domain. All 3 family members bid him farewell. Char whispered a prayer for her father's safe return, noticing her sister's lingering sadness. Hart reassured her not to fret. Though labeled as bandits, they were just regular folks, and he trusted their father could manage alone. Char pondered aloud, asking her brother why anyone would choose to become bandits. The little girl sadly recalled her father's mention of recent civil unrest in the Empire. Could people not coexist happily? Even Hart felt that such a desire was a tall order. Char had a thought and questioned if her brother felt the same way. If he went to battle, he wouldn't be able to do anything either, right? She jumped from her chair, excitedly explaining that her brother's abilities could be used for this. Char gazed at her brother with bright eyes, asking for his thoughts. Hart softened at her gaze and replied that he understood her. Once she got his affirmation, the little girl urged her brother to transform and join the fight. Like the heroes in stories, Hart indulged his sister, morphing into a caped warrior of adult stature who could teleport to the battlefield. He even created a barrier screen for her to witness the battle firsthand. As Hart soared through the sky, he realized things had gotten incredibly complicated. But for Char, he had to give it his all. Upon spotting the bandits, Hart first cut off their escape route. He could have taken them out directly, but since Char wanted to see him in action, he had to engage them one by one. Fighting each one separately took a considerable amount of time. Just as Hart finished, Gold arrived right on cue. He assessed that the situation wasn't about inciting internal conflict. He introduced himself to Hart and requested information in return. Hart sighed in relief that Gold didn't recognize him in disguise. Gold continued, asking if he was the one who had rescued his wife and child earlier. At the very least, he should understand his true intentions. Hart's mind sparked with inspiration, and he danced in front of Gold, declaring himself a champion of justice. After that, he felt embarrassed by his own cheesy words and soared into the sky, vanishing. Back beside his cherished bed, he collapsed in sheer exhaustion. Char, chasing after him, excitedly praised her brother for his incredible skills. Not hearing a reply, the little girl persisted, eagerly asking when he would transform again. Thus, Hart engaged in countless battles as the Dark Warrior, gaining recognition and fame far and wide. Simultaneously, Hart completed a robotic version of himself, creating a fully human-like Heartsea. One morning, Char awoke to find two brothers who could both speak, unable to tell which was her real sibling. The real Hart grumbled that neither of them belonged to her. That same morning, the princess and prince visited Baron Gold's residence. Prince Laius waved his arm in front of his face, irritated, questioning why it was so dusty in the countryside. Princess Marian reminded her brother that he was being quite disrespectful. He was the one who insisted on coming here. Hart gazed at the pair, recalling he had once heard he was the offspring of the king. Thus, the two individuals before him must be his siblings. On the other side, the siblings continued their heated argument. Laius claimed his sister was merely a political tool, unqualified to instruct him. He surveyed the crowd, chastising them for their lack of manners. Laius scrutinized Hart, questioning if he was the level 2 reject adopted by the Baron. He decided Hart would be his first lesson. On the training field, he told Hart to relax, promising to take it easy. Hart activated his magic assessment, discovering Laius was currently at level 9 with a max of 40. Lost in thought, Laius launched a sudden attack. Hart dodged instinctively, while Laius yelled at him not to evade. Hart complied, activating his protection and collapsing, feigning pain as Laius struck. Laius was initially pleased, but soon grew bored, questioning why Hart wasn't retaliating. At the mention of fighting back, Hart sprang to his feet. A few swift sword strikes later, the prince lay flat on the ground. Princess Marian gasped, asking if Gold's son was truly only level 2. Gold shrugged, admitting he had no idea, nor did the boy. So it was assumed to be true. Laius charged again, aiming to intimidate Hart with his magic. But Hart absorbed all his magical energy, causing Laius to kneel in fear. Hart thought it was time to end the match. He needed rest. Flay, having heard Hart was completing mission solo, rushed in, eager to join the siblings. While Char beamed, Hart internally sighed, realizing trouble had arrived. Unable to stop Flay, he could only warn her against excessive fighting in front of his sister. Flay quickly assured him she understood and promised not to do that. Barely had the promise left her lips when she unleashed fire, aiming to incinerate the bandits. Hart halted her, asking her to pause and reminding her of her promise. Too caught up in excitement, Flay ignored him, hurling flames one after another. Hart couldn't watch any longer. He conjured a barrier to protect the bandits. Flay's antics turned the battle chaotic, and by the time they returned home, Hart was too exhausted to keep his eyes open. Flay's voice filled the room, recounting the recent events to Char, who added his own praises. Hart silently lamented when he would finally enjoy a peaceful life. In stark contrast to the lively atmosphere, Flayus's room felt heavy with gloom. He slammed his fist into the bed, questioning why he had to endure such trials. As the prince, the king's heir, he was meant to carry on Princess Lightning's legacy. He couldn't contain his fury at being bested by a commoner of mere level 2. A servant knocked and entered, announcing tomorrow's inspection tour and inviting Char along. Flayus, puzzled, wondered why they needed to bring a little girl. The servant explained the prince would require someone to converse with during the journey. Noticing Flayus's hesitation, the servant pointed out this was also part of assessing the prince. That night, Hart learned his sister would join the tour, prompting him to prepare meticulously. He examined the entire route through his surveillance barrier. Suddenly, a mysterious group appeared on the screen, engaged in a bizarre ritual. Hart sensed something was amiss and approached, inquiring about their activities. Upon discovering he was from Baron Gold's household, they resolved to eliminate him without mercy. In that case, he felt no need to show them any mercy. To counter Hart, they summoned a horde of zombies using magic from their circle. In a game, this would be thrilling, but in reality, it was quite terrifying. He swung his sword, cleaving through them, but they quickly reanimated despite being severed. The zombies closed in on Hart. He erected a barrier to keep them at bay, seizing the moment to locate the glowing spots on their chests, noticing they had stopped moving. The enigmatic figures yelled, commanding them to launch an assault. Unexpectedly, the zombies reversed course and attacked their own summoners. Trapped, one individual from the group conjured a golem directed at Hart. He was taken aback, not anticipating a golem's appearance. Its strength was formidable. One punch shattered the barrier Hart had set up. He acknowledged his overconfidence regarding the defense's resilience. Unsure how to strike, Hart spotted a luminous spot on the golem's chest. Similar to the glowing centers of the zombies, he dodged an attack and used a sharp object to pierce the light. The gem shattered, and the golem fell under Hart's control through spell appropriation. To the remaining humans, Hart simply inquired who their leader was. He sought to learn the leader's name and allegiance. They pointed out the leader, but he refused to answer Hart's inquiries. With no other options, Hart tossed each subordinate into a deep pit to intimidate him. Each person hurled down cried out for their captain, unable to bear the sight. Reluctantly, the leader disclosed they were summoners serving the queen. From his confession, Hart discovered this entire scheme aimed to eliminate Char. He reflected on Char's exceptional qualities, knowing she would eventually outshine the queen. Furthermore, if the border baron had support, the nation's future would be fragmented. Hart pieced together recent events. First, the imperial troops were manipulated to attack his father. Then, the assault on his mother and likely Char followed, all of it orchestrated by the queen. If she could betray him, she'd stop at nothing for her position. Hart recalled the image of his current four-person family. He would never forgive anyone who took away those dear to him. Thanks to Hart neutralizing all threats the previous night, the group's outing went off without a hitch. In a golden wheat field, Char joyfully ran ahead, calling for Marion to catch up. Leia, not wanting to linger with Hart, glanced at him once. Then she too chased after the other two, seizing the chance to be alone. Hart sought out his father, casually asking what to do if the queen was after Char's life. In contrast to his son's anxiety, Gold rested his chin on his hand, whispering that it seemed his son sensed something. Last night, he had received a letter from the Dark Knight. He suspected the queen was behind everything, but was shocked she targeted Char. He helplessly told Hart that she clearly aimed to destroy their family. She was the queen, and they were powerless. He pondered for a moment, then patted his son's head, advising him against any reckless actions. Without her, the country would face dire consequences. The most tragic part was that King Jilka's authority had crumbled long ago. Hart summarized his father's insights. If the queen fell, civil war would ensue. For the first time, Gold recounted how Jaisalow's army had single-handedly defeated the Demon Lord. Following that, she became a hero, earning the title Princess Lightning. With the people's strong support, Jaisalow married the king and grew even more adored. The significant issue now was that Princess Lightning aimed to seize the throne. Hart, wishing to sever ties with his biological parents, had avoided any investigation for years, realizing this was a mistake. Gold, sitting beside him, offered his perspective once more. If a strong replacement for the queen emerged, the situation would change. He had seen that potential, but they were still too young. At the very least, he would wait until that individual matured. He stressed that a good child would grow into a remarkable person capable of shaking the kingdom. Hart listened intently, firmly believing that person was Char, unaware that Gold's gaze had always been evaluating him. Gold thought he grasped the implication, concluding with a statement about knowing what his son should do next to meet his expectations. Hart affirmed his understanding, planning to safeguard Char until she became a remarkable queen. Word spread that a knight from the borderlands had wiped out Jaisalow's summoners, thwarting the assassination plot against Char. Her repeated failures ignited a fierce rage within her. Reluctantly, she acknowledged that Char had become a significant threat. Jaisalowd picked a weapon from the room, ready to take action with a sword that had vanquished the Demon Lord. Hart's voice echoed, suggesting she duel him first. In an instant, magic obliterated the soldiers beside Princess Lightning. She confronted the Dark Knight, questioning how he bypassed her barrier undetected. Heart nonchalantly mentioned the trivial obstacles outside, claiming he easily broke through. Jaisalot surmised that the figure before her was indeed the rumored Dark Knight. Without hesitation, she conjured 3 magic circles intent on ending his life. Heart effortlessly evaded the magical trap, dodging the myriad of glowing shards, realizing her spells were ineffective. Switching to fire, she aimed to incinerate him as Heart descended slowly. Jaisalot taunted him, questioning what kind of Dark Knight he truly was. Just an average one, it seemed. Heart expressed envy at her versatility with swords and other skills. Suddenly, the Dark Knight launched a counterattack, causing all the aura sensed by Princess Lightning to vanish. Heart whispered that he was about to get serious. The overwhelming magical energy surged, leaving Princess Lightning unable to resist. Even the demon lord she once battled lacked such immense magical power. She refused to yield, still gripping the sword that gave her confidence. That sword held a power that convinced her she was the strongest in existence. Yet again, Heart bewildered her by knocking the sword from her grasp. Heart was done arguing with this old woman. He swiftly placed a chain around her neck, warning her that any attempt to remove it would cost her head. Princess Lightning cursed him, demanding to know his motives for humiliating her. Heart coldly replied that her plans were of no concern to him. If she continued to threaten Baron Gold's household and territory, she would be in danger. Only he had the power to remove the collar from her neck. Gizlot laughed in anger, claiming this was akin to slavery. Flay commented that Heart had shown her a surprising amount of leniency. It had been ages since she had witnessed something so stunning, yet incomplete. Heart responded that he found it acceptable. For now, peace would reign. However, if she crossed any further lines, there would be no mercy next time. 5 years went by, and Char encountered no more threats. The territory enjoyed tranquility. Heart's display of power that year had proven to be a wise decision. Despite nearly 15 years in this place, the northern snow still unsettled Heart. He glanced back at Flay, still dressed as usual, and asked if she felt cold. Flay candidly admitted that, of course, she was cold. The human form was a hassle. Heart couldn't take it anymore and magically wrapped her in an extra fur coat, telling her to ask for help next time. Flay's eyes sparkled as she replied that she had 10 more requests, earning a sharp look from Heart. Char gently asked her brother if she could make a request as well. She had just conceived a snow-based killing technique, but the next part was whispered just for Heart. As a brother who adored his sister, he had never turned down her requests. This time, despite his ominous feeling, Heart granted her wish, creating a deep hole that wouldn't fill with snow. At that moment, Gold and Natalia happened to spot them. He inquired about their activities. Char whispered to her brother that they would be discovered. Heart quickly conjured a Dark Knight who danced and vanished, telling his parents it was the work of that person to sound more convincing. Heart added that he had merely passed by and was demonstrating his special technique. Gold, half closing his eyes, accepted the explanation. As for Princess Lightning, he remained unaware of what transpired that year, only knowing she no longer appeared publicly. Rumors circulated that she had suddenly donned a collar like a slave. Initially, they thought it was a trendy fashion statement, but over time they concluded she had mistakenly put it on and couldn't remove it. Heart believed his life of reliance was about to commence, freeing him from any further concerns. A son's instinct told Heart something was off, prompting him to distance himself from Gold. Gold caught on to his retreat and declared that in spring he would enroll in the Royal Capital School, causing Heart's dream life to vanish. Back at home, Gold sat down with a serious demeanor to discuss matters with his son. Previously, Gold had planned to send Heart to the local school, but Heart had vehemently opposed it. He rubbed his forehead, explaining to his son that this time refusal wasn't an option just because he disliked it. Gold presented Heart with the recommendation letter directly issued by the king. Gold speculated that Princess Marion might have shown interest in Heart's magical abilities, prompting her request to the king. Heart remained puzzled as to why his sister would want him to attend a school for magic. Gold had more news to share with his son. Prince Leos had advanced through grades and would be joining Heart, with hopes they could collaborate for the kingdom's advancement. Heart felt disheartened. This was indeed a challenging situation. He had envisioned a laid-back, dependent existence, and seeing his son silent was disheartening. Gold voiced his worries to Heart, uncertain if Jaisalot had influenced the princess to approach him. Yet, as a father, he wished for Heart to experience a wider world. It was fine that his son immersed himself in research, but he wanted Heart to explore beyond those walls. Hart held deep respect for his father and consented to attend school. The first task for Hart was to select a servant to aid him in his studies. He declined his father's generous offer to choose a servant and also rejected his mother's desire to accompany him, noticing his son's indecision. Gold encouraged Hart to take his time, reminding him they had 3 months, while Hart returned to his room to strategize for his duplicate's school attendance. If the copy performed poorly, he would be rejected, allowing Hart to avoid attending. The only option was to underperform academically enough to get expelled. This was Hart's best chance to spare his father any trouble. Hart's clone protested, questioning what would happen if a reckless mage harmed him. Hart devised a protective barrier to shield him from harm, which eased his worries somewhat. He sighed, acknowledging that despite his perfection, he was merely a copy of Hart. He too desired a life of dependence. There was no escaping it. He had to settle for attending school. Hart's current challenge was finding a suitable servant while keeping this under wraps from Flay and Char. While aimlessly wandering, he stumbled into a space teeming with zombies, recalling that he had asked Flay to gather them. He never anticipated it would evolve into a thriving village. Johnny, the village chief, and a zombie, was overjoyed to see Hart and welcomed him warmly. He quickly addressed Hart as Your Majesty, expressing gratitude for his long journey. Johnny stood ready for orders, but Hart had none to give. He noticed other magical beasts and inquired about their presence. Johnny explained they were wild magical beasts that Flay had collected and brought to the village. Hart observed their activities for a while. Everything was meticulously organized, with each individual assigned a different task. Johnny suggested that Hart might want to explore, then personally guided him around the village. First, they examined the well-tended crops. Thanks to these plants, the villagers no longer had to live in fear. He continued to guide Hart through various areas, seizing the chance to explain the functions and activities of each. The more Hart listened, the more impressed he became, viewing Johnny as a kind and considerate individual. He was particularly respected by the villagers and held a strong loyalty to Hart. Hart silently added Johnny to his list of ideal servants. While Johnny rambled on, his incessant chatter began to wear on Hart. This guy was incredibly talkative, and during his daily monologues would truly test Hart's patience. As Johnny was about to continue, Hart cut him off. Claiming he was busy, Hart quickly exited the village, finding a stream to sit by, closing his eyes and sighing at the exhaustion. He had imagined he could enjoy a peaceful, solitary life here. The tranquility around him shattered as the ground trembled under the heavy steps of a golem. He recalled the massive golem summoned by the group of conjurers, along with those undead. The golem settled next to him, presenting Hart with a flower. Its size posed no issue, so he assigned it a role as a close aide. Hart had barely posed a few inquiries when pink smoke erupted from the golem's head. Its voice gently expressed how much it adored its master. Hart dashed away from the forest, feeling disheartened about the challenges of finding a servant. He needed to return home for some rest, but Flay was waiting right at the door. Upon seeing him, she firmly questioned his earlier comments about a servant. For a brief moment, he thought about choosing Flay, but his father's warning made him reconsider. In her spare time, Flay had taken Char to explore the magical beast village. The little girl engaged in a serious conversation with Johnny. Char dubbed this magical beast Village Pandemonium, the Garden of Monsters, contrasting with the peaceful atmosphere. Near Baron Gold's domain, a significant number of ice dragon hunters were gathering. They had trapped a young dragon, excitedly claiming that capturing it would bring them great wealth. The ice dragon, using the heavy snowfall to obscure its escape, dragged its injured body in search of refuge. Gold, upon hearing this, tasked Hart with evaluating the situation, worried it might invade their territory again. The Empire had inflicted severe injuries on the dragon. If it went on a rampage, ordinary citizens could be in danger. Flay, upon learning this, outright refused the mission, as she held a negative view of dragons. Dragons were a wise and formidable species, yet when the demon lord faced peril, they merely hid in caves. Char, who had been eavesdropping, later asked Flay if she planned to rescue the little dragon. Char felt sad, stating that if a friend was hurt and alone, it would be incredibly lonely. As before, Char's desire mirrored Hart's, leaving Flay with no choice but to agree. They promptly set off to locate the little dragon. Perched on a high mountain, Hart utilized barriers to scan below, quickly spotting the world dragon, looking frail. Flay directed Hart's gaze to another screen. Imperial forces were closing in, and they needed to act fast. Disguised as justice warriors, the duo successfully rescued the little dragon from the Imperials. Hart could hear the little dragon's voice echoing in his mind, reminiscent of his communication with Flay. The little dragon curiously inquired if Flay was a magical beast and why one would serve humans. Flay thought it best to share her fateful encounter with Hart and his immense power. After an hour of storytelling, the little dragon grasped the situation, realizing she was a reincarnated demon lord. Surprisingly, the little dragon apologized for not joining the demon lord's war, explaining her aversion to conflict. Hart, standing nearby, understood her feelings. Magical beasts came in various forms. He curiously asked how she had managed to survive all this time. The little dragon explained that to avoid detection, she had quietly lived in a mountain cave for around 300 years. Initially, she spent her days deep within cave hollows until one day an adventurer stayed overnight and left a book. Intrigued, the little dragon picked it up and read it countless times. Desiring more books, she flew to the town, transformed into human form, landed in the village, and collected books. The little dragon repeated this process many times, gaining vast knowledge until adventurers finally discovered her. During the chase, all her books were set ablaze. Flay, upon hearing this, wept for the unfortunate girl hunted by humans. She resolved to accept the little dragon as a fellow being and allow her to join Pandemonium. Hart, hearing the unfamiliar name, inquired about its location. Flay explained it was his village, named by Char. Hart was indifferent. Today, he would welcome this little dragon. The little dragon had no objections. She understood this was what affection felt like. Moreover, she had always yearned to connect with someone like this. After expressing this, the little dragon transformed into human form, hoping Hart would give her a name like humans have. He softly called her Ice Dragon, so let's just stick with Lisa. Flay jumped into their chat, hoping for her assistance soon, looking directly at Lisa and stating she was the first to serve Hart. Though the little girl was merely the second with everything settled, Flay instructed her to return together. Even in human form, Hart could still soar using his wings. Hart cast a spell to fly alongside the girl. Flay, lacking that ability, dashed on the ground, loudly declaring she wouldn't be outdone. When Lisa first arrived at the Baron's estate, Char and Natalia adored her. Even Gold was surprised that the ice dragon turned out to be such a charming little girl, as long as she followed the castle's rules. He had no issues with the family gaining another member. Flay took it upon herself to teach Lisa everyday human tasks while raking leaves in the yard. She warned the little girl that a laid-back attitude wouldn't help her manage the work here. Flay spun the broom in her hand, eager to show the girl how to grip it. But after just 2 spins, the broom snapped in two. While Flay was trying to impress, Lisa had already tidied up the outdoor garden. The next chore was washing dishes, ironically. As the instructor, Flay kept breaking them one after another. While Lisa meticulously cleaned each dish, Flay attempted to showcase her cooking skills, only to fill the kitchen with smoke. Calmly, Lisa prepared a vibrant spread that delighted the entire family, also attentively serving Char and wiping any food from her mouth. Natalia praised Lisa for her smooth execution of tasks. The maids reported that the little girl was a quick learner. She earnestly inquired if the girl had any other talents. After a moment of thought, Lisa replied that her love for reading gave her knowledge of basic magic types. Natalia cheerfully suggested that Lisa could assist Char as her maid. From the start, Lisa excelled as Char's close attendant, caring for her, teaching her magic, and reading together, while Hart, passing by the training ground, heard his sister calling and turned back. After a few days of practice, she could conjure a large fireball. While instructing her master in magic, Lisa cleverly used the water created by spells for laundry. Hart noted that the girl was both teaching magic to his sister and handling household chores. Lisa was genuinely a good child, serious, eager to learn, and highly adaptable. Suddenly, Hart wondered if Lisa could be the servant he had been searching for. Gazing at the two girls on the training ground again, Hart found himself in a dilemma. How could he separate the two who had just forged a friendship? Hart reassured himself that a solution must exist. He whispered, "Wasn't there that trick with the magic door?" Lisa could step through the door to the capital as his servant, then return to the castle, which would work for both siblings. Hart believed he had solved the servant search. Next, he would focus on the mission of getting expelled. During a break, Hart casually announced to the two girls that he would be attending school in the royal capital next week. Char was thrilled by this news, thinking about the bad people who also wielded magic. She urged Lisa to cancel all plans for the day to summon the knights for a round table meeting. Char declared that the round table meeting was a secret. Alongside Lisa and Flay, Gollum and Johnny were also present. Flay, upon hearing that Hart was preparing to enter royal school, slammed the table in frustration, demanding to know why he hadn't informed her sooner. Char apologized, explaining she had just learned about it herself. The little girl insisted that since he was her brother, his choice of timing and audience surely had significance. She recalled her brother mentioning that school was a perilous place, so she wouldn't allow her big brother to be afraid. From what Char understood about her brother, Hart had likely already placed a magic door in the royal capital. Thus, she resolved to accompany Lisa and Flay to the capital to gather information. Johnny and Gigan were tasked with preparing for their arrival and escalating the chaos. Though Lisa sat at the same table, she was aware that this matter needed to be reported to Hart. Hart expressed gratitude to the little girl. Without her, who knows what might have happened. Lisa earnestly questioned whether he was truly facing a secretive organization. Hart recognized her analytical nature, so he carefully selected his words to avoid upsetting her. He confessed to operating covertly behind the scenes. He explicitly invited Lisa to accompany him to the royal capital as his personal attendant. Hart informed her that further details would follow, but this was a task only she could undertake. This mission was crucial. Observing Hart's serious expression, Lisa agreed to assist him. Their collaboration was entirely confidential. No one in the household was aware. Meanwhile, Flay was still diligently striving to become a true servant with Char's guidance. The initial task of donning servant attire failed as Flay couldn't fit into the garments. For the next task, Char inquired if she had any knowledge of flying. Flay responded that flying wasn't entirely out of the question. She then showcased her skills by jumping and soaring into the nearby woods. Upon her return, she was adorned with twigs and dirt. Char, puzzled, gazed at Flay with sparkling eyes, commending her for her talent. Natalia emerged from the house, questioning what the two were up to. Upon discovering that the little girl wished to learn flying magic, she was alarmed and disapproved. Claiming her daughter was too young for such demanding activities, Flay, with no other choice, dashed off to find Hart for assistance. He had already witnessed everything on the surveillance screen. As soon as she opened the door, he handed her a mini airplane just the right size for one. Once again, seeing his sister joyfully seated on the airplane, Hart whispered that the first mission was a success. The next phase involved learning about Liza's daily activities. He directly asked the little girl what she did during her solitary days. Liza recounted her day, waking at noon to finish a book, dozing off in the afternoon, waking again in the evening to read, then sleeping once more. Hart murmured that it truly was an enviable lifestyle. He then inquired about her eating habits. Liza estimated she ate about once a week. Hart was astonished, remarking that she was practically on a diet, a true expert in self-isolation. On a relaxed day, Liza approached Hart, requesting an explanation of the magic door's mechanism. He gestured with his hands, explaining it was merely about placing two doors in different locations and linking them. The little girl, resting her chin on her hand, disagreed, stating his explanation was lacking. Liza articulated her belief that teleportation magic was inherently advanced, requiring more than one person to execute. Hart offered an excuse, claiming he didn't sense much magical energy being used. Perhaps it was something else entirely. Liza grew concerned, questioning if it was magic from another realm. Hart sighed, pondering if the little girl had truly grasped the situation. A few days later, Hart created a device to measure magical power, inviting everyone for a test. Flay was the first to try, scoring 40 out of 77. Liza scored 36 out of 71. Char, witnessing these results, praised both girls enthusiastically. Hart mused that magical beings typically possessed high levels of magic. When it was Char's turn, he was taken aback. The little girl's score was impressively high. At 61, he recalled that the queen's documented magic level was only 44. Flay chimed in, complimenting the little girl, stating that wasn't too shabby. Hart earnestly asked his sister if she was still training. Would she reach the maximum level immediately? Char replied that wasn't feasible. Before she was aware, she had conjured a fireball, prompting her mother to cast a sealing spell. Hart, astonished, asked if that was true, suggesting there was a prodigy among them. Char, curious, inquired about her big brother's level, not waiting for him to respond. Flay answered that naturally it exceeded 100. Hart only mentioned it was a secret. Finally, the day of his enrollment arrived, and the entire family came to bid him farewell. Liza, whom he brought along, concealed her ears and tail. Without those features, the little girl appeared somewhat uneasy. Flay, realizing she wasn't the one departing, collapsed in despair on the ground. Char stood next to her brother, urging him that good would triumph over evil and encouraging him to give it his all. Marion, brimming with excitement, grabbed something from the Baron and rushed into her brother's room to show him. Leia's guests revealed that the letter was a heads-up that Hart was en route to the royal capital. He informed his sister that such news didn't need to be shared piece by piece. Marion countered, claiming her brother's desire to recommend Hart was why she was putting in so much effort. She questioned why her brother was willing to go to such lengths. Leia's responded that he simply wanted to gauge Hart's abilities. Since that time, he had dedicated himself to refining his magic and sword skills. Yet each time he felt Hart had outpaced him significantly. Thus, the only option was to enroll in the same school to see if he had caught up to Hart. Leia's teased his sister, suggesting she was more smitten with Hart than he was, waiting in their father's room for the recommendation letter. He claimed he had no interest in romance or anything of that sort. But was that truly the case? He sighed, seriously asking his sister if things felt tense. Leia's had heard rumors of strange religious groups thriving at the academy. Marion inquired if her brother was already aware of that. They were part of the Lucifiler faith, which she had heard was a cult masquerading as a branch of the main state religion. Their beliefs were radical, and they worshipped demons. This influence wasn't confined to the academy. It was reportedly spreading across the nation. Furthermore, the number of nobles joining was on the rise, attracting substantial financial backing. Leia seriously questioned his sister about the rumor that their mother was behind the funding. He truly had no idea what their mother was scheming. If he were honest, Leia's felt a genuine fear of her. She was becoming increasingly radical. News of the king and queen's discord was circulating throughout the realm. Though he hesitated to think it, there was a strong chance their mother aimed to eliminate their father. Leia's asked his sister what their course of action should be. She suggested, albeit casually, that perhaps Hart could alter the situation. At that moment, Leia's recalled the tale of the Dark Knight in Baron Gold's domain, an ally of justice capable of defeating even dragons. Leia suddenly stood up, proposing that if they sought that person's assistance, the issue could be resolved more easily than expected. Gislo entered, interrupting their discussion, commenting on how eagerly her children were chatting. Marion greeted her warmly, noting it had been a while since their last meeting. She complimented her, saying each encounter made her more beautiful, reminiscent of the former queen. Suddenly, she seized the princess by the neck, questioning if she had just glanced at her collar. She shouted, demanding to know if it appeared amusing, pathetic, or if she was ridiculing her. Seeing his sister in danger, Leia shouted, pleading with their mother to stop. Gislo released her grip, laughing heartily, claiming she was merely joking. She reminded Marion that careless gazes could cost her ladylike dignity. She then turned to Leia, asking about the news that Baron Gold's son would be attending the same school as her son. Gislo stressed that since he was leaving the countryside, the boy would undoubtedly feel lonely, so her son should befriend him. She leaned in close to the prince, asking him to gather intel about the Dark Knight from Gold's son. As she walked away, Leia stood frozen, contemplating whether he had unwittingly pulled Hart into something unimaginable. On Hart's end, he had just stepped out of the forest near the royal capital, the only place that could conceal the door. From a high vantage point, Hart gazed toward the royal capital. At this distance, flying would be swift, but walking was their only option. Leia, hearing a noise, pointed in another direction, urging Hart to look. An evil bison was pursuing a group traveling in a horse-drawn carriage. Leia speculated it was hungry, hence its pursuit and aggression toward humans. Hart wanted to disregard it, but if Char found out, it would be a significant problem. Currently, he wasn't in a rush, so he had to intervene. Hart transformed into the Dark Knight and crashed into the horse-drawn carriage to halt it. As he helped the passengers escape, a girl from the carriage urged everyone to flee. She would hold off the evil bison. Hart thought she was formidable, so he chose to stay back and observe. Out of nowhere, a single pull from the wicked bison sent her soaring. Another stomp, and she'd be done for. Just in time, Hart intercepted the malevolent bison before it could strike her. He seized the moment to heal the girl. A young boy with wide eyes approached to express his gratitude. The dark figure lowered his head, assuring the child that thanks weren't necessary. While pursuing justice, Hart also took the chance to fix the group's carriage. The girl beside him expressed her gratitude, noting her lack of funds for a ride. Typically, she'd offer money or gifts, but Hart understood her intent and waved her off. Justice doesn't demand a reward. After the group departed, he and Lisa fed the wicked bison until it was satisfied, preventing further attacks on citizens, then headed into the city. On their way, Hart asked the little girl why she looked so troubled. Lisa responded that the earlier girl gave her an odd vibe. If she had approached closer, perhaps she would have understood. Hart chose not to respond to the little girl. He didn't plan to linger here. The odds of encountering that person again were slim. The registration process had drained Hart's energy. Upon entering his room, Hart activated the magic door for his return. Today had been exhausting. As soon as Char spotted him, she eagerly inquired about the royal capital. He stretched out on the couch, feeling worn out, and asked Flay to prepare some food. Char whispered to Flay, and they both claimed they were stepping out to buy food, then slipped through the door to the royal capital. Hart, uneasy about letting them go alone, decided to follow. He hadn't expected the area around the palace to be so lively. After their meal, Char pulled out a map, laying it on the table for everyone to see. To grasp the layout of the royal capital, the little girl assigned Flay to head south, Lisa to the west, while she and her brother would explore east. Hart looked at them, puzzled, asking if they hadn't come to play. Char replied that they certainly did, but understanding the geography was still important. The little girl stressed that their goal was merely to learn the layout, hoping everyone would keep it down and not draw attention. In Hart's mind, he thought, trust and peril, but since he was there, he would accompany Char. They visited numerous renowned spots in the royal capital. Along the way, Char even picked out a lovely pair of earrings. Hart indulged his sister, giving her whatever she desired. He made the purchase. Char joyfully dashed ahead, while he trailed behind, cautioning her to watch where she was going. Just as Hart finished his warning, the little girl collided with someone crossing the street. Rushing over, he realized it was the girl he had assisted earlier. The girl looked at Hart and asked if they had met before, as their last encounter was during his dark night form. Hart replied that this was indeed their first meeting. The girl contemplated, admitting she didn't recall Hart's face, but she remembered the immense magical energy she sensed from him. Tilting her head, she remarked that his magic was only 2. Hart feigned annoyance, claiming that even with the vast power she mentioned, he felt mocked. Such a matter of lost dignity was not something to be discussed, even in jest. The girl thought that after her long journey, she felt exhausted and disoriented. She sincerely apologized for making Hart uncomfortable. Hart reminded her that more importantly, wasn't she in a rush? The girl recalled her task, apologizing to the siblings once again. Then she hurried off. Noticing his sister still staring after the girl, he asked if something was bothering her. Char didn't quite understand, but she sensed something very unusual about that person, a feeling that she wasn't ordinary. Hearing his sister's observation reminded Hart of Lisa's similar comment. He wondered if that person possessed abilities akin to magical beings, or if Char sensed something else entirely. Regardless, he wanted no part in such complications. Starting tomorrow, he would attend school and retreat into his room. Hart returned to his room, where his duplicate informed him that a faculty member had barged in. Hart C refused the pre-enrollment assessment, insisting he had already spent too much time in this room. He saw this as a chance to fail spectacularly, hoping the teachers would kick him out. Excitement bubbled within him as he imagined the possibilities. No more staying here. He wanted a quick resolution. Polkos guided him into the classroom for the assessment. The opulence of the royal capital overwhelmed him. One classroom could easily accommodate over 100 students. Hart felt a surge of emotion, envisioning himself studying here next spring if he passed. He refused to let appearances fool him. He was resolute in his plan to fail the assessment. The first question left him utterly confused. He simply wrote, "Don't know." For barrier magic, he only answered at a basic level. Content with his lackluster responses, he felt certain he wouldn't score any points. Then came ancient magic. He recalled reading a fascinating book with his sister by an author with an absurdly long name. Lost in thought, he inadvertently wrote everything down, realizing only after he finished. Gold announced it was time to move to another room for the magical assessment. Hart protested, questioning why he should go when his magic was merely level 2. The teacher insisted he must attend, stating it was an order. The instructor in the magic room was a young girl. Upon seeing Hart, she complimented him for perfectly matching her preferences. She introduced herself as Terrietta, conducting research on ancient magic. She burst into laughter, asking if Hart thought, "This kid is a teacher." Then her tone shifted, scolding him for his blatant disrespect. Terrietta warned that even with royal recommendations, if he upset her, he'd still be sent home. Hart, excited, asked if that was true. Her focus shifted to the young teacher. Hart's interest wasn't fear, but rather eager anticipation. Staring at the shouting teacher, Hart felt a headache coming on, wondering how long this absurdity would last. Polkos reminded the doctor to get to the point. He handed over Hart's completed test. Seeing Terrietta's expression shift, Hart felt a sense of satisfaction, thinking she was genuinely upset with his random answers. He then prepared to measure his magic on the sphere, not overly concerned since it would only register 2. The light from Hart's magic caused the sphere to explode. He cursed, declaring it was utterly fake. He braced for Terrietta's reprimand and expulsion. Terrietta shouted, asking Polkos if he had witnessed anything. The broken sphere was proof that his magic was so powerful it couldn't be measured. The teacher awkwardly replied that he had heard rumors of Hart's magic being only level 2. The doctor laughed heartily, claiming she believed there were exceptions to every rule. Suddenly, she exclaimed that the sphere was a magic measuring device, though she didn't fully grasp its function. As a mage, one should seek to understand that before discussing their abilities. Terrietta gazed at Hart's test with sparkling eyes, noting he hadn't reached the level of court mages. His bold response of "don't know" showed spirit, and his take on barrier magic was remarkably impressive. Terrietta grew even more enthusiastic when she reached the ancient magic section, which quoted her own work. Hart felt as if he had dug his own grave upon hearing this. It turned out the author of that long-winded book was indeed her. Terrietta passionately declared she would keep this intriguing young man for herself instead of handing him to other teachers. Hart observed their argument, sensing something was off. He felt himself being drawn into their amusement, returning to tell Hart to see everything. All future decisions would hinge on him. Understanding Hart's reluctance about school, his sister handed him the gun given by her brother. The little girl encouraged him to strive to complete the mission exceptionally. Hart sighed, expressing his sadness about not wanting to attend school. Ultimately, he was merely a magical imitation. How could he confront the troublemakers at school then? As a mere copy, how could he decline the mission entrusted by Hart? After enduring a long day in class, Hart was eager to flee back to the dorm as soon as the bell rang. On his way back, he stumbled upon a group of individuals. Hart's instincts warned him to steer clear. Getting involved would lead to trouble. He pressed against the wall, attempting to blend into the surroundings. With his head down, he unexpectedly collided with the girl from earlier. They exchanged surprised glances. Schnelder, noticing them, questioned why they hadn't bowed. The girl admitted her rudeness, but pointed out that the school rules were vague. Schnelder had no desire to engage with them. He simply wanted to assert his authority. The girl apologized, explaining she was new and unaware, her gaze shifting to Hart, hoping he'd fabricate an excuse for their release. No one anticipated Hart to suddenly clutch his stomach and exclaim he needed the restroom. Schnelder turned crimson with rage, shouting, "How dare you insult me with such disgusting words?" He cast a spell, intent on teaching Hart a lesson in manners. Hart didn't ponder much. He knew that if he didn't flee, his life was at stake. From a distance, Schnelder targeted Hart and launched an attack. He hit the ground hard, a large tear ripping through the back of his clothes. Just as they were about to leave, Hart stood up, confused, dusted himself off, and muttered. Fortunately, the barrier's release functioned effectively. Hart turned to see the vice president's displeased expression. Only then did he realize he needed to feign pain. His over-the-top performance only fueled Schnelder's irritation. Schnelder prepared to cast another spell, but Hart, terrified, drew his gun and fled back to the dorm. Hart, upon hearing the news, shouted in frustration, questioning why it had to be so complicated. While inspecting the barriers, Hart spotted the girl heading toward the head student's residence. The scene shifted to Schnelder's home, where he angrily splashed water on the person tending to his wounds. Naturally, he wasn't easily accepting the girl's apology. He made a demand that left Hart feeling restless. He reappeared in his dark night form. After escorting the girl back to the dorm, he created a separate space to teach Schnelder a lesson. He affixed a magical device to Schnelder's shoulder, warning that any attempt to remove it or use magic would tighten and draw his blood. The Dark Knight set a condition. If Schnelder genuinely reflected on his actions, he might consider releasing it. The following morning, rumors spread like wildfire that Baron Gold Sun had defeated Schnelder. Everywhere Hart went, he was met with admiring gazes. Overwhelmed by the attention, he just wanted to find a way to escape. Unexpectedly, he ran into Terrietta, who invited him to learn about the Academy's curriculum. First up was the night course, where students practiced applying magic and training. The goal was to mold soldiers and knights, the future backbone of the nation. The remaining scholarly course focused on the most effective use of magic or researching and developing it at the Institute. Terrietta noticed Hart's interest in ancient magic, making her place the perfect choice. She presented a document enticing Hart to sign and confirm his desire to study. Laius, spotting Hart from a distance, rushed over, exclaiming he had found him. The prince greeted him with a swift punch to the face. Hart easily dodged it and retaliated, unaware of who had attacked until he heard Marion angrily calling Laius's name. She reprimanded her brother, questioning if anyone greets others in such an impolite way. Laius grumbled, "You've gotten stronger again, haven't you, Hart?" Returning to the main topic, Marion inquired if Hart had enrolled in the Institute yet. If not, he could join her at the Institute. Laius interrupted, claiming his sister was being selfish, insisting Hart would join his course. Terrietta shouted for the siblings to be quiet, asserting that Hart would join her. Laius identified her as the doctor with the ridiculously lengthy name. He whispered into the Hart's ear, revealing her ongoing research into ancient topics that had yielded no results for ages. She frequently clashed with her fellow teachers. Terrietta countered, insisting that it wasn't a lack of achievements, but rather that the foolish couldn't recognize them. Thus, the trio bickered endlessly, showing no signs of stopping, just as the girl Hart had saved earlier passed by. Curiously observing the scene, Hart thought she might be his ticket out. He bid farewell to the three, promising to return, and quickly slipped away. Hart sprinted far from the building before pausing to catch his breath, apologizing for involving her. The girl seemed unfazed, staring intently at Hart, then inquiring if he was the same person from yesterday. She could tell that the person before her and the one who fled yesterday were entirely different. Yesterday's Hart lacked any magical aura, but today he radiated a powerful presence that overshadowed others. Hart couldn't provide a clear answer, hoping she'd see them as the same individual. He gazed at the girl for a moment, then asked if that was the conclusion of their discussion. Insfilia paused briefly, then bowed to Hart, stating she first wanted to apologize for dragging him into trouble. Secondly, she expressed gratitude for his assistance in escaping Schnelder's group. Finally, Insfilia made a request, hoping Hart would consider being her friend. She would be thrilled if he were the first to accept her invitation. Hart was taken aback by the girl's offer. He asked if she had never had friends before. Insfilia requested some time to share her story. She revealed to Hart that she had been abandoned 4 times since birth due to her ability to speak, eventually being taken in by a monastery. Even though she was welcomed into the monastery, her life was far from easy. The priest she cherished most passed away when she was just 5. It was an isolated environment with no interaction with the outside world, leaving her unaware of how humans lived. Hart understood, acknowledging that Insfilia wanted to learn how to make friends. If that was her goal, she had picked the wrong person, as he wasn't skilled at making friends either. So, he was also unfamiliar with social conventions. Insfilia viewed this as a positive. They could learn together. She noted their shared experiences. Hart thought he could use her to sidestep a lot of trouble at school. Recalling the class assignment, Hart asked Insfilia if she had selected a research class yet. Upon hearing it was ancient magic, Hart felt weary of encountering that ant everywhere. With no other options, he decided to choose Terrietta to be in the same class for convenience. Insfilia eagerly asked if he still wanted to be friends after hearing her tale. Insfilia was ecstatic, wanting to express her gratitude to Hart. Char felt bored since her brother's school attendance increased her free time, leaving her unsure of what to do. Just then, she sensed that Hart had good news, and quickly said goodbye to Flay to find her brother. At home, Flay and Lisa remained. After a while of chatting, Lisa brought up magical creatures. Flay shared with Lisa that her previous role was to stay beside the Demon Lord, uniting magical creatures. She had a very close bond with the Demon Lord, who could be considered her best friend. Flay's eyes sparkled with admiration when she mentioned her former master. The Demon Lord was someone who always prioritized magical creatures and monsters, a genuinely kind individual. It was precisely this kindness that led the Demon Lord to frequently clash with other Demon Lords over how to treat humans. That's why Flay often had to intervene to settle those disputes. The Demon Lord held a lofty ideal to create a paradise where humans and monsters could coexist. Flay now speculated that perhaps from the start he hadn't intended to fight with Princess Lightning and had deliberately allowed himself to lose. One thing greatly astonished Flay when attacked by Princess Lightning. He let all the magical creatures escape, sacrificing himself for his beliefs. Flay was convinced he had planned to reincarnate as a human in advance. Lisa asked if that meant he aimed to reincarnate as a human and fundamentally change human perceptions. Flay couldn't confirm if the Demon Lord had thought that far ahead, but she appreciated his innocent way of thinking. Hart had mentioned that all the memories from before reincarnation faded away. Flay speculated that it was a way to eliminate the gentle, kind side of himself. Flay elaborated, noting that the Demon Lord often oversimplified their kind, so Hart was taken aback when she introduced herself. She had no qualms about disclosing his name while he was still the Demon Lord. Lisa responded, confirming that not everyone was privy to the Demon Lord's name. Flay cautioned her against revealing it, stating the Demon Lord's name was Insphalia. Meanwhile, Hart had just made a new friend, a girl. Upon learning her name was Insphalia, he thought it was too lengthy and shortened it to Iris. He didn't remember Flay mentioning this name earlier. Iris had no strong feelings about the abbreviated name. She inquired if Hart had selected his classes yet. If he hadn't, they could do it together, which she believed would be more productive. Hart eagerly took Iris back to his room to tackle the assignments together. It was only at the threshold that he remembered she was a girl. Now, sending her away would be too awkward. His only choice was to finish quickly and then head home. Char was in the room, waiting for her brother. When she saw Hart return with a lovely girl, the little girl burst into laughter. Char complimented him, declaring that her brother had indeed made a beautiful friend. Then she sadly murmured that naturally he would end up with 5 or 10 girlfriends. Hart didn't react to his sister's comments. He took a seat at the table and began picking a class. After a brief focus, boredom set in, and he asked his sister to choose for him. Char eagerly agreed, then seriously prepared a paper and handed it to him. With some free time, Char chatted endlessly with Iris. The little girl told the older girl that her brother had surpassed the need to learn from others. Her big brother was something else entirely. Iris asked Hart earnestly if he was truly that remarkable. Hart thought, oh no, she actually believes that. If he didn't send Char away, things would only escalate. The little girl read the expression in her brother's eyes, stood up, and bid farewell to both. Hart's upcoming studies were all set with subjects picked by Char. Gazing at the challenging subjects his sister had selected, Hart thought this was beneficial, because with tough subjects, the teacher's expectations would be sky high. He would be more easily judged as failing. On the day of class assignments, Liza encountered Iris again. The little girl cautiously asked Hart if Iris was genuinely human. Even up close, she still couldn't clearly tell if Iris was a magical being or a human. From appearances, Hart didn't think she was magical, and she seemed harmless. So there was no cause for concern. Hart was placed in Class C, the middle tier among 5, with average performance. Before the lesson began, the teacher informed everyone that they could be moved up or down based on their tests. The teacher started handing out the first assessment test to the class. Hart mused that the opportunity had arrived swiftly. For this test, he planned to underperform intentionally and pretend to lag behind, then say goodbye to the classroom. Hart glanced at the entire test. It was absurdly simple. Char had completed it 6 months ago. He couldn't fathom why the homeroom teacher thought this was appropriate. Regardless, if he performed poorly this time, it would look intentional. So, he aimed to make the least mistakes possible, targeting a score of 6 through careless errors. All of Hart's plans crumbled when the homeroom teacher graded the tests and revealed the class average was merely 2. The teacher's eyes brightened as he looked at Hart's test. Despite numerous careless mistakes, he still managed to score 6 points. Hart glanced around at the applauding crowd, confused about what had just occurred. Was it possible that only his exam was straightforward? After a moment of reflection, he understood it wasn't due to the other's lack of skill or the test's ease. It was simply because his sister was a prodigy, and now it was too late. The homeroom teacher told Hart she would recommend him for Class A. As Hart entered Class A, Iris and Lace flanked him, bickering over who would sit next to him. Hart resigned himself to their antics. The teacher stormed in, irritated by the commotion, and slammed her roster on the desk. She introduced herself as Belgam, the calculation theory instructor, her gaze fixed on the trio. She exclaimed that the 3 first-year students in the front row, chatting during advanced courses, were quite bold. Belgum warned them to brace themselves. Failure to answer questions would lead to expulsion from the class. She pointed out Heart and Iris, claiming she would teach them with utmost dedication. Belgum commenced her lecture, focusing on primary and secondary attributes. Iris was called to place her hand on a crystal sphere. She gazed into the sphere, marveling at the beauty of possessing all attributes. Belgum proposed that Iris could join her research class for thorough training. Iris flatly declined after hearing the offer. Belgum resumed her lecture, using Iris's attributes to illustrate the various types. However, the crystal sphere failed to convey every nuance and extent. Research aimed at quantifying this was ongoing, but it proved to be incredibly challenging. Hart silently questioned if it was truly that complicated. He merely needed to glance at the requirements, and all of Iris's indicators were clearly displayed. At the podium, Belgum began explaining the challenges of approaching this topic, as values could be erratic. If someone had already enhanced their secondary fire attribute with magic, the ratio would surpass other fire spells. She turned to Lace, demanding a quick answer to her question. Lace pondered briefly before responding that it must relate to proficiency levels. He elaborated that repeated enhancements had led to increased proficiency. Belgum acknowledged his reasoning as decent, but noted it was dismissed by research. Hart muttered about hidden attributes. Belgum, overhearing, excitedly slammed the table, urging him to repeat himself. Hart clarified that he believed there were hidden attributes linked to the main ones. For instance, if fire had an enhancement secondary attribute, then self-enhancing magic would significantly increase. Belgum patted Hart's shoulder, exclaiming how he knew this, as it was Weisal's latest research. Weisal was an enigmatic figure who submitted papers to the Research Institute irregularly. This individual's research was ahead of its time and had been advised against public display. Belgum was thrilled because everything was conducted in secrecy. Even the royal family had not received any reports. She exclaimed that she never expected Hart to be such a rare talent. Once more, she inquired how he felt and if he wished to abandon ancient magic for her class. Hart declined. Iris reminded the teacher that recruiting during class was quite improper. Both exceptional students opted to follow Terrietta, which filled her with joy. At last, her enthusiasm had been conveyed. Thanks to the two new students, the research room could continue to thrive until their graduation. Terrietta eagerly dashed off to organize a celebration, telling Hart and Iris to relax and wait. Hart C. sat beside Iris, inwardly lamenting why it had to be him. Today was supposed to be the original plan, but after a morning full of exhausting events, Hart didn't want to go. Regardless, since the confirmation was already signed, Hart C. seized the chance to slip away unnoticed. As he carelessly kicked someone lying on the floor, Terrietta, passing by, explained that Schnelder had been affected by a strange magic. She wore an eager expression, eyeing the motionless figure, remarking on the fortunate opportunity for ancient magic research. Terrietta called for Iris to come over and examine Schnelder, then asked her what kind of magic she thought it was. Iris observed closely, then speculated if it might be attributeless magic. Terrietta, upon hearing the outcome, commended her as the top performer in the exam. She summarized for the two that this stemmed from magic without attributes. Terrietta directed her next inquiry to Hart, asking what distinguished modern magic from ancient. He sighed and answered randomly, suggesting it might be the age. Terrietta held back her annoyance and turned the question to Iris. They debated for quite a while before deciding to wake the unconscious individual. She explained that the research room couldn't resolve this magic, only the caster could. Terrietta insisted there was no alternative but to swiftly identify that person. Schnelder clenched his teeth, admitting he didn't know either, just that it was someone in black with a peculiar voice. Hearing this, she burst into laughter, questioning if being defeated by an unknown wasn't humiliating. Terrietta had sensed his thoughts early on. He feared the danger of speaking up. Regardless, even without his words, she could already deduce who it was. Terrietta concentrated on her two students, discussing a justice ally in Baron Gold's territory who matched Schnelder's description. She speculated that this individual had always operated in the territory until Hart arrived in the imperial capital. Terrietta eagerly asked Hart what he had been concealing, urging him to share if he had other magic. The barrage of questions made Hart feel like crying, silently wishing for the original Hart to return and handle this. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared at the window. Schnelder, upon seeing him, grew furious, demanding if he had been spying on them to show up at such a precise moment. The dark figure simply told him to reconsider the conditions he had set and cancel the duel scheduled for tomorrow. As he turned to leave, Terietta's magic restrained him. She had numerous questions, and without answers, he couldn't depart. As soon as she finished, Hart broke free from the bindings. He seized the moment to teach Terietta a lesson: never bind others without reason. Terietta, trapped by magic and unable to move, had to plead with Hart for forgiveness, vowing never to act so impulsively again. The welcome party had 4 participants. Terietta animatedly conversed with Iris. Hart C sat quietly observing the two. After some time, teacher Polkos initiated a conversation with Hart C. He mentioned that T had been his student, always straightforward since childhood. Highly intelligent, she learned 1 thing and understood 10, mastering 100. She had achieved great success and enrolled in this academy since there was nothing left to do at the mansion. Thus, he was also tasked with overseeing her. Ultimately, everything he had taught her from the start was now unnecessary. T was undeniably a genius. Not only could she innovate new magic, but she was also regarded as a sage, a leader in modern magic. The party concluded with Iris rolling over and drifting off to sleep. At that moment, T focused on Hart, asking if he understood why Iris had opted for ancient magic. T had met Iris during the exam, achieving an exceptionally high score. Her experience felt akin to a commoner striving to achieve a dream. Sadly, Iris's magical potential remained too low, and even more regrettably, her indicators might not improve. However, ancient magic was a viable option as it could uncover clues to enhance magic levels. T had never explored it before. She would begin now, feeling thrilled despite the slim chances of success. Meanwhile, Schnelder was filled with rage. Word of the cancellation of tomorrow's duel would spread throughout the academy. He pounded his fist on the table repeatedly, muttering that he had gone as far as conspiring with Lucifiler to make his father the next king. Yet someone was obstructing his path. He couldn't accept this situation. His plans were on the verge of collapse. Schnelder summoned a specialized assassination team. He ordered them to eliminate Iris's group by tonight. The operation commenced while all 4 individuals in the Research Institute were fast asleep. Outside, they took care to establish barriers for soundproofing and detecting intruders. Moreover, the attack team comprised the most elite members as they approached the Research Institute. They found that the institute was shielded by an invisible, unbreakable barrier. Out of nowhere, a door swung open in the wall, and one by one they were drawn inside. The remaining individuals grew cautious of the rumor that an unknown figure always lurked beside the heart. With Siva shielding him, they had to exercise greater caution. Moments later, numerous doors burst open, and the Dark Knight launched an assault from every angle. Confusion engulfed the group. They had only heard of one foe, yet now faced a swarm of Dark Knights. The leader of the assassination squad uncovered the entire truth. Only one Dark Knight loomed above, orchestrating everything, and he was the sole one capable of movement. Hart grumbled about their master, irritated over a trivial issue. Desperate to eliminate others, he captured the entire assassination team and dragged them to Schnelder's residence. Trembling, he questioned if one clamp wasn't sufficient, asking if Hart intended to kill him. Like a lunatic, he rummaged for a syringe and injected himself. Hart glanced at the troublesome sight before him, lamenting that his senior had morphed into a monster via a mysterious syringe. He felt lost on how to manage this predicament, wishing he could pretend he hadn't witnessed anything. At that moment, the barrier connecting to Char opened, and the little girl in front of the screen called out for her brother. Having gone to bed early, she awoke with a sense that her brother was actively engaged. Hart sighed, informing the little girl that he had just been battling a mysterious monster. Curiously, the little girl inquired which monster friend it was. Hart briefly clarified that it was a human turned into a monster by an organization. Char asked earnestly if her brother had any means to rescue that individual. Seeing Char's distressed face, he felt compelled to assist this fortunate guy. Hart soared ahead, attempting to minimize the damage potential on Schnelder, but was seized by his massive hands. Caught between the palms, he tried to use magic restraints to pry them open. With his hands immobilized, Schnelder opted to destroy his own arms to regenerate new ones. Hart realized this was a type capable of regeneration. Unsure of the next steps, Char reopened the connection to inform her brother that the monster friend seemed a bit odd. Its body had shrunk slightly. The little girl also noticed that the monster's skin color had faded. Hart concluded that by continuously severing the enlarged parts, the body would gradually revert to its original state. Thanks to his sister's guidance, Schnelder was rescued and reverted to human form. Char commended her brother for his impressive skills, saying she would have a lovely dream tonight. After wishing his sister good night, he intended to resume the earlier discussion with Schnelder. Upon hearing Hart call his name, he panicked and fled. It seemed today was not the day for a serious conversation. Hart figured he would talk again later, but needed to retrieve the syringe he had used. Today had been exhausting. He needed to tidy up the villa and get some rest. Heartsea opened the window and joined Hart, who was floating outside, asking how he felt. As for him, he had started to find enjoyment in these matters. He and Hart shared a unique bond, ensuring they both felt the same way. Hart acknowledged that everything outside was far better, yet he felt that connecting with others had its merits. Hart glanced at the individuals lying within the institute, then told Heartsea to stay there tonight since it was past curfew. Hart genuinely praised Heartsea for performing exceptionally well. Under Char's guidance, the group of servants scoured the streets of the royal capital for information. At last, they received news. The king and queen's relationship was deteriorating, causing tension among the other nobles. All of Char's initial predictions had proven accurate. She sensed that danger was looming over the royal capital. Johnny interjected, stating that the enemy had already begun their actions. He asked Char if she had witnessed how the monarchists managed the vanguard troops. Johnny urged the little girl to recreate those images for them, showcasing the battle between Hart and Schnelder. One by one, Char, Flay, and Johnny gazed in admiration, showering praise. Lisa, sitting beside them, sensed everything was spiraling out of control, but chose not to intervene. Later, Char began to clarify that the figure on the screen was the vice president of the student council. Char figured out that he was following orders from the hidden student council. To sum it up, they had learned about Hart's abilities, causing significant chaos since her brother joined, linking them to a massive, sinister organization threatening the capital. Flay insisted it was irrelevant. No matter the strength of their foe, Hart couldn't be beaten. Char countered that this time, they were unaware of the full extent of their hiding spots, which would complicate matters. Thus, it was time for everyone to act, sneak into the academy, gather intel, and slowly bring them to light. Char proclaimed they shared the same beliefs, uniting now to back her brother's endeavors. Hart watched the kids' strategy unfold, but had no plans to get involved. He would keep an eye on them, ensuring their safety, as all he desired was a quiet, uneventful life away from it all.